Now, most World War II films focus on the chaos of the battlefield, the gunfire, the sacrifice, and the soldiers who fought in some of the war's most decisive moments. Pressure chooses a different path. It tells the extraordinary true story of the men and women behind the scenes whose decisions shaped the course of the war before a single Allied soldier stepped onto the beaches of Normandy. Directed and edited by Anthony Maras and co-written by David Haig, adapted from Haig's acclaimed 2014 stage play of the same name, Pressure explores the crucial days leading up to the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944, when weather forecasting became perhaps the most important scientific challenge of the Second World War. At the centre of the story is RAF Group Captain James Stagg, the Scottish meteorologist tasked with advising Supreme Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower whether the greatest amphibious invasion in history could proceed. With hundreds of thousands of lives depending on his judgment, Stagg faced an impossible responsibility: predict the unpredictable. The result is tense, intelligent, and surprisingly emotional war drama that proves some of history's greatest battles were fought not with weapons, but with information, science, and courage. In early June 1944, the Allied forces were prepared to launch Operation Overlord, the invasion of Nazi-occupied France. The military machine was ready. Thousands of ships waited in the English Channel. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers were prepared to attack. But the only enemy no one could control was the weather. James Stagg was brought in to the Allied headquarters at Southwark House to coordinate conflicting meteorological predictions from British and American forecasters. Among his greatest opponents was American meteorologist Colonel Irving P. Crick, whose confidence in his own methods put him directly at odds with Stagg's cautious, scientific approach. Crick would base his evidence on historic events or weather patterns, while Stagg wanted to base his forecast on the data. The overall decision, though, would fall upon General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who carried the unbearable burden of making this ultimate call. If the invasion went ahead in poor conditions, thousands of men could drown before they even reached the beach, and if delayed too long, the entire operation could collapse, giving Germany time to strengthen its defenses. What follows is a fascinating battle of personality, science, military politics, and human emotion as Stagg and his team search desperately for a small break in the weather that could change the course of the very war. That, of course, is the basis on which Pressure is built upon, and just what makes it just so fascinating. Now, Andrew Scott delivers the stand-up performance of the film here as James Stagg. Rather than portraying him as a traditional cinematic hero, Scott presents him as a quiet, intense man completely dedicated to science and truth. Stagg is not particularly charming or sociable. He is serious, methodical, and often emotionally distant, but that is exactly what makes his character compelling. He understands the enormous responsibility that has been placed upon him and refuses to allow military pressure or personal pride to influence his judgment. Scott's restrained performance captures the personality of the man whose greatest weapon was his intellect perfectly. The fear and exhaustion behind his eyes communicate the pressure of knowing that a single wrong prediction could cost thousands of lives. It is one of Scott's finest performances and a reminder of his remarkable versatility as an actor. Brendan Fraser's casting initially appears unusual. Physically, he bears little resemblance to the real Dwight D. Eisenhower, and for some viewers that may take time to adjust. However, Fraser quickly proves that capturing a historical figure is about more than appearance. His Eisenhower is not portrayed as a larger-than-life military legend, but as a man carrying the impossible burden of command. He is exhausted, anxious, and painfully aware that every choice he makes will determine the fate of thousands of young men. Fraser wisely avoids portraying Eisenhower as arrogant or overly dramatic. Instead, he gives us a thoughtful leader who listens to his experts, questions his own decisions, and understands the enormous human cost of war. Following his career resurgence, Fraser once again demonstrates why he remains one of the most compelling actors of his generation. Chris Messina provides an excellent performance here as the confident and confrontational American meteorologist Irving P. Crick. Crick serves as one of the film's major sources of conflict. He and Stagg ultimately want the same outcome, the successful invasion of Europe, but their methods could not be more different. Where Stagg is cautious and evidence-based, Crick is certain and uncompromising in his own predictions. The arguments become a fascinating representation of the conflict between scientific humility and absolute confidence. Damian Lewis, as expected, is outstanding here as Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. However, the film's interpretation of Montgomery may divide audiences. The character is portrayed as highly arrogant, impatient, and often dismissive of those around him. While Montgomery was certainly known for his enormous confidence and difficult personality, the film arguably emphasizes his harsher traits to create greater dramatic tension. This is not a criticism of Lewis, who performs the role brilliantly, but rather a discussion of how the screenplay chooses to present one of Britain's most famous military commanders. Kerry Condon brings warmth and humanity to the role of Kay Summersby, Eisenhower's personal secretary and close confidant. Initially, her role may seem like a typical dramatic device designed to provide emotional balance among a room full of military commanders. However, the historical records show that Summersby was generally one of Eisenhower's closest assistants during the war, and the two shared a deep personal friendship, with rumors of a romantic relationship existing for many years. Condon's performance provides an important emotional perspective within a story dominated by strategy, politics, and scientific debate. Now, one of the most interesting aspects of Pressure is how close it remains to the real events. The central story is absolutely true. The weather forecasts provided by James Stagg and his team played a crucial role in Eisenhower's decision to delay the invasion from June 5th to June 6th, allowing the Allies to exploit a brief break in the storm. The film also brilliantly recreates the painstaking work of the 1940s meteorology studies. Without satellites, computers, or modern technology, meteorologists relied on handwritten charts, observations from ships, mathematical calculations, and enormous amounts of human expertise. The attention to detail highlights how extraordinary the achievement was. However, the film does take some dramatic liberties. The film suggests that Stagg joined the operation only days before the invasion. In reality, he had been working with the American meteorologists and running practice forecasts as early as November 1943. One of the film's biggest inventions involves Stagg's wife going into labor during the preparations and hospital bombing, placing her and her baby in danger. While Stagg's wife was indeed pregnant at the time, she did not give birth until November 1944. The bombing sequence is entirely fictional. This is perhaps the film's most unnecessary addition, because the real story already contains enough natural tension without adding a personal tragedy that never even occurred. The movie depicts a sudden dramatic change in weather shortly before the invasion. Historically, the weather had already begun deteriorating by June 3rd, and meteorological observations, including important information from Irish weather observer Maureen Sweeney, contributed significantly to recognizing the incoming storm. Perhaps in one of the most egregious aspects of the historical accuracy, the film completely omits Norwegian meteorologist Sverre Petersen, whose forecasts were highly influential in convincing Eisenhower to delay the invasion. The decision was not the work of one man alone, but the result of a wider Allied meteorological effort. In one minor gripe, church bells are heard ringing on June 4th. During the war, British church bells were largely silenced after Dunkirk and reserved only as an invasion warning signal. Despite these minor mistakes, Pressure remains significantly more historically accurate than many mainstream World War II films. The film was produced by Working Title Films and financed by Studio Canal. Anthony Murray directed the project and collaborated with David Haig, whose original stage production premiered at the Lyceum Theatre in Edinburgh in 2014 before transferring to London's West End. Haig himself previously played James Stagg for over 300 performances, meaning the film adaptation came from a writer who had spent years exploring the character. In a remarkable coincidence, one of the assistant editors hired to organize the archival footage turned out to be the grandson of the real James Stagg. The production team had no idea of the family connection when he was hired. The filmmakers planned to shoot beach sequences at Caymer Sands on a Monday, coincidentally the same day D-Day had originally been scheduled, before being delayed. A weather forecast predicted severe storms with 6-foot waves and winds exceeding 50 knots. The storm arrived exactly as predicted, preventing filming on that Monday. Then, just like in June, the weather cleared the following day, allowing the crew to shoot under perfect conditions. The production team recreated original D-Day invasion maps with extraordinary precision, including slight differences in colour caused by the original map being manufactured in separate sections by different companies across Britain who did not know they were creating parts of a top-secret invasion plan. The replica was later donated to a museum. The crew constantly consulted elderly meteorologists to teach the actors how to use period forecasting equipment and recreate the original weather charts used during D-Day planning. For the beach scenes, the makeup department calculated that approximately 30% of Allied troops were killed or wounded during the landings and applied the same ratio to extras using wounds, burns, and prosthetic injuries to reflect the devastating human cost of the invasion. Brendan Fraser also shaved his head for the role and studied numerous Eisenhower biographies, even visiting the Imperial War Museum to examine the original D-Day battle plans. Now, Pressure is not a traditional war film. It does not rely on large-scale battle scenes or constant action. Instead, it finds drama in conversations, calculations, arguments, and the enormous psychological burden carried by those making decisions far from the front line. Anthony Murray directs with intelligence and restraint, allowing the performances and historical situation to create the tension. The entire cast is excellent, but Andrew Scott is the clear standout, delivering a thoughtful, nuanced portrayal of a man who history had largely overlooked. The film is not completely accurate, and some fictional additions, particularly the storyline involving Stagg's wife, feel unnecessary and slightly undermine the true story label. However, these issues do little to diminish what is otherwise a fascinating, respectful, and deeply engaging portrayal of one of the most important moments of the Second World War. For anyone interested in World War II, military history, science, or the hidden stories behind famous events, Pressure is essential viewing. It reminds us that the success of D-Day was not determined only by soldiers carrying rifles on the beaches of Normandy, but also by the scientists sitting round a table, studying clouds and numbers, and trying to predict the future. Pressure gets a 9 out of 10. A gripping, intelligent, beautifully acted historical drama that shines a light on the forgotten scientists who helped make D-Day possible. While not perfectly accurate, it remains one of the finest World War II films in recent years. So what did you think of Pressure? Please let me know down in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dive reviews.